Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming to this presentation. My name is Pavel Zemliansky, and I will talk about localizing user-centered design thinking when designing online hybrid instruction and how to adjust your designs to sort of geographical institutional conditions locally. I'm going to begin by briefly reviewing the purposes of my presentations, of which there are three. Firstly, I want to talk a little bit about the typical challenges of online instruction and online design that might be caused by a lack of design thinking from teachers. I think we've seen plenty of evidence of that during the COVID pandemic and before that even, but especially during the pandemic, and I think bringing this up is really important. Secondly, I want to highlight some key elements of what we can do about that and how to apply design thinking to course and assignment design for online and hybrid learning based on user needs particularly. And then finally, I want to briefly highlight some of these applications of these ideas to a course that I have had to develop at a Norwegian university that was taught in a hybrid sort of online face-to-face mode. So first, I think it's important for us to pay attention to the fact that, especially during the pandemic, but even before that, there's been what Blythe calls a lack of design thinking on the part of teachers and course designers. Which was caused by the privileging of content delivery versus design efforts on the part of teachers. And what this meant in the practice in a lot of situations is that a lot of teachers simply said, okay, well, I'm teaching face-to-face. I do lectures, so I'm just going to put my lecture on Zoom. I'm going to fire up Zoom, put myself out there, turn on my PowerPoint, and keep talking and keep teaching the same way that I taught face-to-face, hoping that something will stick, right? And then, of course, we began hearing stories about just lack of student motivation, students getting bored, students not going to class, teachers getting frustrated, thinking that online mode is just bad by itself, when in fact, what made it bad for them is the way that they actually taught their classes. And then in addition to that, of course, the traditional and national educational systems and traditions such as preferences for lecturing as the main mode of instruction, prescribed exam formats, etc., could influence those decisions as well. So that's important to keep in mind. And finally, the good old privileging and prioritization of technology over pedagogy. That's something that, of course, those of us who teach online for a long time have noted many times before, but it became really, really important in a negative way during the pandemic. So according to a lot of researchers in online course design, there are basically two kinds of ways in which we can think about course design for online learning. One is what is called system-centered design. And basically this kind of thinking focuses on kind of building everything around the system that you have technologically or instructionally or pedagogically without actually thinking about the users. So for instance, you might begin by thinking about your LMS, your learning management system. Like let's say you're using Canvas. So you might say, okay, well, I have Canvas and I have a course to teach. So I'm going to design my course in such a way that primarily fits just that LMS, that primarily fits Canvas as an environment, and that I can deliver through this environment to my students without actually thinking about what the students might need or what they would want from a course. So thinking about the system takes priority. So I might begin by developing learning outcomes without thinking about students, make a syllabus just because, I know how to make a syllabus. So I'm going to do that again. Then I choose my readings. I'm going to make my assignments, and then I will put it all on the LMS, on Canvas or Blackboard or whatever, publish it, and then my students will learn by accessing these materials. So my thinking here is not about the users and their needs, but about the system and the technological environment which is available to me and which allows me to deliver content of some sort. On the other hand, we have user-centered design, which is a superior way of thinking about these issues because it conceptualizes and iterates one's course not as a collection of content to be delivered or transferred to the student, but rather it thinks about the experience of the user and how they will engage with that content when they're enrolled in the course before actually putting that content together, but beginning by thinking about, okay, what is the user experience here? What is the engagement kind and level of the users with this content? How can they be engaged with the course in a way that's not just thinking about me delivering it, but also them engaging with the content and having a two-way communication? So all the decisions about the content, the assignments and assessments are based on known and understood user needs. Now, there are limitations to that approach, and I'll talk about those, but the basic idea here is that instead of thinking of the system and the LMS first, we think about the user needs and then fit everything else in there. So the three main principles of user-centered design, really quickly, this is not really the point of this, but just to give you a background. Learn as much as you can about your students, collaborate with the students when appropriate and possible in course design, and then iterate your design within and between course versions based on user research data and based on the groups of students that you're actually teaching. So learning about the students could involve such simple things, even like before you begin teaching, learn about their majors and areas of study. Which areas of study do they come from? What might attract them to your course? What might have brought them to your course? What might have been interesting for them in your course? Just learning those basic things will help you understand how to design the environment which would benefit the students based on their needs and interests. Collaborating with the students is a bit more difficult because it takes time, and some researchers such as Blythe pointed out that it's really hard to achieve because there's sort of an uneven power relationship and the semester is not long enough to really truly collaborate. But even then, there might be some room for small things like collaborative draft assignment design, for example, like what would help you learn best. Here's an assignment that I propose. Can we think together about what we might be able to do with this assignment, for example, to adjust the description to the students, to the learner's needs, to the user's needs. And then the final idea, of course, is, do not assume that every group of if the same. If you've designed your course once and you're teaching the course again to a different group of students, then you might need to make changes into that design to really address the needs of the particular learner group. What this allows us to do is it allows us to put learners, not technology, at the center of the process. That's pretty key. It also aligns with a lot of pedagogical theories and disciplinary sets of guidelines, especially in disciplines like communication and writing, where the user's needs and the interactivity are at the forefront. And then it potentially could also take advantage of students' existing learning styles and preferences, as well as their experiences as learners, and help them transition to a new online learning environment. So if your students are not really into being talked at for a long time, being lectured at, as most current students are, then this approach might actually help them engage with the course better because they're not being talked at all the time. So the challenges, as I sort of briefly mentioned before, there's a lot of time is needed to build a genuine relationship. That's a real challenge. Semesters aren't long enough to really develop collaborative relationships with the students. And then there's a power imbalance, which I mentioned before. So those are the things that we could keep in mind in the back of our minds, but still there are some things we can do. So I'm going to move here to an example of a course which I developed at a Norwegian university, course in engineering communication, which was taught sort of in a hybrid online and face-to-face modality, where I hoped to implement some of these ideas to an extent at least, and I would like to share with you what I've done to kind of localize my user-centered thinking to this particular environment. So this is a course in entry-level, university-level engineering communication for students who are actually trying to get into engineering programs. It's a large course. It has 4 parts. It's got physics, math, Norwegian, and English. I'm teaching the English part, obviously. And then passing the exam opens the way for the student to enter the university and become an engineering student. So there are about 50 students on the roster. Typically, I teach this course every year. It's a year-long course, by the way, which is nice. And about 30 or 35 of them actually come to class because there is no requirement to attend. So that's a local condition that influences certain course decisions, as I will hope to show. So a little bit about learner analysis, user analysis. Most Norwegian students are proficient in everyday language, so I don't need to teach them everyday English. They're not really great at academic English like most other English speakers, even native English speakers, so that's where we focus our efforts. I'm saying that because I've seen materials here in Norway which assume that students need to be taught everyday English usage. That is really not the case. Their everyday English is fine. So understanding that allows me to move straight into academic and professional language and kind of not worry about sort of basic grammar, basic usage, that kind of thing. Students in this course also tend to be older. Many of them have work experience already or military service experience, so they are more motivated, have some experience with things like workplace communication, for example, which helps a lot in a lot of cases. They're really good at collaboration. Norwegian students learn how to collaborate, in middle school and high school, and they're not afraid of it. They know how to do it. So they're not sort of put off by collaborative projects, which is really important. Many of them speak 3 or more languages. I had a student last year who spoke 7 languages because he came from another country and he learned, a bunch of languages on the way. So that also helps the sort of language development quite a bit. But on the other hand, many are used to being taught primarily through lectures at the university level. So they think that when they come to class, they're going to be lectured. So that's sort of a feature of this learner group, which needed to be they need to be disabused of that a little bit, because they come to class often expecting to just sit and absorb information. That's not how I teach. So I'm the first time I taught this class, I kind of assumed, I'm going to talk about iterations a little bit here. I kind of assumed that this would be a sort of a typical kind of first year course in academic/professional writing. So I kind of went into designing this course with that idea in mind. Turned out it wasn't the case. Turned out that many of them weren't used, for example, to the usual drafting feedback revision cycle, because in Norway in high school, they don't really learn it like most students in the US, for example, do. And then the other thing that was really interesting that I had to adjust for was that extensive homework is really discouraged by the university, and they don't really expect to get a lot of homework. So most of the work is supposed to happen in class. If it's face-to-face in the classroom, if it's online, it's usually taught synchronously through Zoom or something like that. And so they're expected to do most of the work in class. So there's a synchronous requirement expectation as well, which I had to take into account. So what I had to do was I shifted most of the assignments to class time, which was in this case in Zoom, including writing time. I increased the time allowed for in-class assignments, and I reduced the number of formal assignments, which I would have had more of, but the system really did not allow me to do that. So I had to take that into account when I designed this course very quickly. So just a really quick rundown of sort of the lessons that I'm learning still about this and how my thinking is changing still. So I think the most important lesson here is that globalized learning requires localized approaches to course design, that we cannot simply put a course up designed in North America and attract European, Chinese, African, Asian students to the course thinking that they just need the same content. The design has to match local conditions. So one size does not fit all. Online learning design should begin with questions about the learners, not LMS or course material organization. Institutions need to shift faculty training, that's a big one, to focus from delivery of content to designing with the learner in mind. So design thinking, again, something I started with. And then finally, user-centered design is messy and unpredictable, and so is teaching and learning. And so beginning course designers should go into this process with that in mind and not thinking that it's actually a problem when you run into a situation where you need to sort of make changes and things don't quite work out the first time and you need to adjust your approaches. That's not actually a failure. That's actually a sign that you're being mindful of your users' needs and you're being mindful of your design environment, okay? So I'm going to stop here and thank you for listening, and I will be happy to take any questions. I appreciate your attention. There's one reference here with a pretty famous one, but just in case you're not familiar with it, you can get this from the presentation. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.